Okay. Well, welcome. This is our August Q&A meeting. If anybody's interested and you're able to, next month is the Kansas State Fair. From the website and the emails that you may have gotten, you can sign up Genius. It's easy to get to. Once you go there, go to a screen like this, and then you can log in or create a sign in, and there are instructions there. These are the slots to be filled and the slots that have been assigned. So that's simple to do. Lots of bearding going on today, especially now that the heat's back. They're just trying to ventilate. And if you're not extracting already, this is a good time. While the weather's warm, don't wait till September. Although not everybody did as well as could have been, they're still pretty good. Let's see if I can keep this from advancing. So our association officers, President Ed Darlington, he's on to this evening. Let's see. Matt Brandis is our program chair, Cecil Sweeney, our librarian. I've got to get this to stop. Let's see here. Jolie and Cecil are setting up at the county fair, so they're not going to be available this evening. Cheryl Burkhead, our editor, is online. Month to date for our rain in July, we hit it almost on the nail, 4.39 inches. This was the drought map, the middle of the month for Kansas. We're just starting to get a touch. And then, of course, this came out. This includes through the 26th. We got rain right after that, about 3.5 inches. So we'll see how much that changes. Missouri's not looking too good either. This was the middle of July. And this was the end of July. So that really is creeping up from the south. We'll see if any of that changes. I'll put it on the website. And that's our monthly averages. Our average high is 90 degrees in the month of July. And of course, it's only 89. That's 1 degree difference. But it's going to make me do this. I'll get through it. Yeah, well, I'm going to have to fix the settings on this. Sorry about that. Okay. So this is our August temperature outlook. It looks like it's going to be above normal. And we'll jump right in, I guess, with our, I didn't really get any questions tonight. So this is going to be pretty much an open format. Feel free to unmute yourself and jump in and we'll just have a nice discussion. But this came in from Nancy Chapman. It's not really a question. She was just making a comment. This beekeeping is hard, maybe not always rocket science. It's learning and understanding bee nature. It's something you can't put on the back burner even when other life events take up your time. So She said this is her second year, but first year for her 2 hives. Last year's 1 hive didn't make the through the winter, and so she's got 1 super on 1 hive, and wants to know what she can do with having so little. She says we probably already discussed this or covered it, and she missed it. She's got plastic foundation on, so she can't cut it off into chunks. So, anybody have any suggestions? Ed, what would you say?
Well, the main thing is we're, as beekeepers, there's 2 things we really can't control, and that's our bees and the weather. And of course, they're the 2 main influences on whether we're successful for the year. There are obviously certain things that we do that help the bees, and we want to make sure the things we do don't hurt the bees. And so, yeah, when you look at right now, everybody ought to either have harvested or finish harvesting. And then if you're doing chemical treatment on your, for mite control, you ought to be doing that as soon as you get your honey off and start your multiple treatments of that, so you go into the winter as strong as you possibly can. Now, I think it was Nancy that had the comment more than a question, but with a weak hive at this point, you still have some time to build honey reserves going into the winter. But if they don't, then you ought to look at combining it or at least feeding it as you're going into this period to give them more reserves, because yeah, from what you have described, they probably will not make it through the winter. Now, when they finally get into the winter, recognize that it takes about 1 frame per week until they start having brood, and then it requires roughly 2 frames a week for them to survive. So even though you make it to say February, late February, early March, if you don't have the stores for them to survive going into the spring, and of course things, they're bringing pollen in and they're doing other things, but be aware that that's you're not out of the danger zone just because they made it to early March.
Very good. Yeah. So that's what we're doing right now, is thinking about winter. The bees are too. Once the sun starts going south. I'm sorry, I'm having to try to get this to work. I will have to practice this more. Figure out why the setting's not working the way it should. So we did cover this back in April. Someone was talking about paramoth, and I think because we're doing extracting and some people may not put all their supers back on, that it would be appropriate to remind you the directions for storing your combs. But this product, you want to make sure that if you're getting the product to use to prevent wax moths, the important chemical to remember is paradichlorobenzene. If it does not have that ingredient, it's not the right kind, and you could kill your bees if you use that to store. But the directions on this says for the control of moths in beehives and bee housings, see side panel text under the heading wax moth control directions. Now, this is if you're buying this product through a bee supply dealer, but it says to be used for empty extracted combs when in storage. And caution, do not use for comb honey, cut comb honey, or combs of honey that have not been extracted. So be sure you're reading the directions. If you need to, Google. But paradichlorobenzene is the chemical, the active ingredient that you are looking for in such a control. So just an interesting photo that I took. Bees are collecting propolis. Cheryl Burkhead is on, but she might want to discuss. We brought this up during our monthly meetings for any of you that might not have attended. She had a bee kill that was near her home. These aren't her bees, these were her neighbors. Any tips you'd like to add, Cheryl?
Can you hear me okay? Because I'm on my
Yes.
phone. I'm trying to multitask. I'm outside. If you suspect a kill in your colony, don't manipulate the hive in any way. Let's see, you posted the link, Robert. It's through the state of Kansas. If your kill's here in Kansas, in Missouri, I'm not up to speed on what you do for Missouri, but if you're in Kansas and you suspect a kill due to pesticides, you can file a complaint with the state of Kansas. They have a website, and my neighbor, who's about 1.5 miles down the road, filed one that morning after I went out and took a look at what she was seeing over the last couple of days. And she had a phone call from the inspector within the hour. So I thought that was a really good response. And they decided to come out that morning. So he was there by about noon. So, and you know, they can take samples if they want to, ask, you know, what you saw and when and that sort of thing. That way they at least know about it and it's on their records. You know, they're probably not going to have any answers for you. They do give you, they give you a number, a reference number. And I think at some point in time, she could go in and access that, but they're not going to actively seek you out with anything about the kill. Her concern was a neighbor had used some Mosquito Joe mosquito treatments, and I don't know when that was, but they can certainly look at the time of application and if that relates to when she was starting to see dead bees. But we've had a lot of spraying in the area as well, with some of the crop, either by helicopter or by the boom sprayers. I never called to see what exactly they were spraying. I know one of our other beekeepers, I think Michael's on, he had a phone call actually from the applicator, which I thought was a step in the right direction, prior to them spraying 1.25 miles, I think, Michael, wasn't it, southwest of his property. He did have a notification from the crop spray company, but we don't have all the same spray companies out in Southeast Shawnee County. I know I've not ever been notified when they've been spraying around us, and they were even closer than that a week or so before Michael got his notification. So I think Drift Watch is still a voluntary thing that the spray companies can choose to look at before they go out and spray. I don't think it's mandatory in Kansas yet, but it would be nice.
Mhm.
So, not that I'm going to do anything with, you know, that many hives in the backyard when the time comes. I mean, I didn't really smell it. It was early in the morning when they applied by helicopter east of my house. They were spraying soybeans, and it was probably about 9 o'clock in the morning. Temperatures were still relatively mild. There was little wind. So, you know, you just listen to him fly over, but he treated all parts of the east of me. He was out for a while. So anyway, I think they got rain when they were supposed to apply, the day they were supposed to apply near Michael, but the wind was going to be, I think, out of the northwest. So I don't know if they ever applied that day or not. I think Michael's on Hewitt.
Mhm. Yes, he
He
is.
could probably answer that question if he knew if they ever applied that day, because it was kind of rainy that morning, I believe. But I would just encourage you all to, if they don't know, then it never happened. So if they get more of a step forward and start reporting this, then they'll have a record of it. So.
Thank you, Cheryl. That leads me into something. So July and August are really the times we need to be aware of what's going on in your colony, or at least, make an observation from the outside because of small hive beetle. This is a inner cover lid with a hive that was infested with larvae, and doesn't that look pretty? That's the same lid. I think in this case, this was a migratory lid that leaked and water got through when it rained. But it's kind of a mess to clean up. And if I can elaborate, we did have a bee kill. This garden organization that I assisted last week, we pulled the honey and extracted it. And on the Friday before, we noticed one colony did not have any bees at all. And the other two colonies looked like they were thriving. We pulled the honey, extracted it. In 48 hours, we put the supers back on. And when we returned to the hives, actually the other two had died out. One did have some dead bees on the bottom, and the other did not. And the small hive beetle were starting to take over in the original colony, the first one that had no dead bees, that had dead bees that we'd noticed prior to extracting. We ended up pulling all those combs and throwing them away. So just FYI. And I think I can stop sharing the screen here. So anybody else experiencing any bee kills or small hive beetle problems that you know of?
Hey, Robert.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd say on that, you probably have several small hive beetles already running around inside your colony. So when it succumbs to pesticide or whatever, it doesn't take very long for them to gain a foothold. But also the colony will put out a stress pheromone, and those small hive beetle know it. And so you'll have a whole bunch more that just descend on those colonies. They seem to know even before the beekeeper when a colony's on its way out, because it releases the stress pheromones. And so you got to get in there really quick. If you're not going to save frames or salvage comb if you suspect a pesticide kill anyway. And it's no fun to have to clean those up, because I've done it before, just like Robert. But the quicker you can get in there and not wait. There was somebody else that posted on a Facebook page that she knew this hive had crashed, but she waited, even a couple days is too long to wait to try to clean that up, because you have other bees in there robbing, and it's just a mess. So anyway,
the warmer it is, the faster they work.
Yeah.
At destroying. Yeah, it's not fun. That's probably the nastiest thing you'll probably ever have to deal with. Even wax moths, I don't think are quite as nasty, because sometimes you can salvage things, but at least we just pop the frames out and we save the wooden frame, and we will clean those up and wash them off, and we will use them next year with brand new foundation and obviously new bees. So something we have to go through. Well, I think at this point, no other questions came through by email earlier in the day. Didn't see any. So, but we do have some chat going on. So I guess I'll start with that. Joe B says, I pulled capped honey today after waiting 2 weeks to maximize this effort. I only got 30% of my anticipated honey, while another 60% is not capped. And his question he's got, one is, should I pull the remaining uncapped and test and dry. And I think Cheryl, you're in the middle of pulling. What would you say? If I can ask you.
I would pull it and test. I actually had some uncapped running 17. I pulled some open uncapped honey in the backyard just 2 days ago, and it's actually running a lot lower moisture than what I had pulled in my first round that was under wax cappings. And the nice thing about uncapped is even if it is above 18.6, you can blow a box fan down through it. If you have a dehumidifier, you can use that, put it in a small room. Don't get it too hot because you don't want to melt your wax. And so be careful on your temperature if you get it in a small room. But you can blow a fan, just a fan down through it, and it'll bring it down considerably in real short order. Whereas if your honey is capped, it takes so much longer to get the moisture down in those once they've been capped. So it's actually to your advantage that they're uncapped. And the colony's not going to go to the effort to cap it this late in the season. It requires too much energy, too much resources to cap that, unless they'd have some big heavy flow, which is not the norm. Even if they do decide to work a few soybeans right now, it's just a waste of their resources to cap it. So I would pull it. I would probably leave or pull and extract and maybe put a super back on those colonies. I mean, I know we need to get mite treatments on, but the mite control that I'm using on my colonies, I really don't want to put it on when it's 100 degrees outside. So I'm going to be impatiently waiting over the next couple of weeks to finally have to treat. But that's an individual choice on everybody. You apply certain products. I use Apigard a lot. If you apply Apigard at 100-degree temperatures, you're going to risk them tearing out brood, and you'll start calling us and saying, I got all this brood that's been torn out of the cells and it's all over the entrance. And that's just normal when you put it on at these high temperatures. So I'd wait. We're down in the 90s. We get a cloudy couple of days when you first put on application, or we get some rainy weather for those initial few days that you put on treatment. If you just have a few colonies out in the backyard, you can react to the weather a lot easier than I can work in more colonies. Sometimes I just have to do things when the weather isn't so great. But anyway,
Well, he had a second question.
I'd go ahead and extract. Don't leave it on unless you think the colony needs it. But I don't really think they would have put it up above the queen excluder if they really needed it down in the brood nest, because they'll rob it back too. So if they need it.
Second of three questions he's asking. The other one says, are others seeing reduced honey this year?
Yes, for some.
Yes.
It's real regional. It's real regional for the most of us. Yes, because not all of us had black locust in our backyard that our bees worked. And we had a lot of rain in early May, and my bees couldn't get out and work the yellow sweet clover. If they could get out, it was washed out because of the rain. And so most of their honey was made during white sweet clover and whatever they could get from Dutch clover if you had timely rains and it didn't get too hot and dry right away. So I guess average to probably a below for a lot of people. And if you feel bad about Northeast Kansas, there's a lot of people in Kansas that have it so much worse than we do right now. So
Central and West, yes.
Even Southeast, I'm getting some reports because I'm getting ready to do the cappings newsletter. And so You know, maybe Riley County did pretty well, you know, just out to the west of us, the Kanza group. But
North Central.
yeah, I don't even know that if Wichita really has done all that exceptional,
Mhm.
surprisingly. So, because I mean, even you get rain, it affects your nectar and your foraging for your bees. So
Yeah,
anyway,
we had too much rain.
Yeah.
Too much in March, too much in May.
and then
So,
it's turned off dry now to extremes. And unfortunately, I think that's how beekeeping is going to be. We start talking about, you know, these extremes of
Hey.
weather, and so
it's agriculture. His third question was, if I don't test and dry, how do I handle the remaining frames that are not capped? Just pull them anyway.
you could pull them anyway, but you really need to test. You could find somebody who's got a refractometer. We all have refractometers. You could go to, you know, Johnson County, you take a frame or two out of the super, take it over to Johnson County to the state fair, let them know you're coming. They'll bring a refractometer with them. Jolie will probably have one on her. She could certainly test. We can test at our club. We have our meeting, August 15th.
Mhm.
You know, we could
Bring
bring
a
a
sample.
refractometer. Yeah,
Yeah, bring a sample and have it checked.
bring a sample. Sure. It's better to leave it in the frame. I've not really had problems with hive beetle. You know, they always say to pull it and try to extract it within a few days. I mean, I suppose if your frames are really overrun with beetles. But I just find having it in a lighted room and a fan blowing down through it, I just don't have problems with beetles. But just beware, if it's uncapped, it's going to dry down really quick. You're probably going to drop, what do you think, Robert, a point every day or two?
Yeah.
Pretty fast, just blowing a fan through it and getting in an, you know, air conditioner. I mean, that'll lower the humidity, being in an air conditioned room or where you can control the humidity.
Sometimes they're just not bringing in enough nectar where they're going to finish it off, and it won't get that way. Usually, I know in the month of August, by early September, I just pull it anyway, and it's
Yep.
always seems to be down in the below 18.5 in the correct range.
But
Next,
a lot of mine that was open was actually running 17 something.
mhm.
But
And the
you
lower,
wouldn't know that unless you had a refractometer. You can kind of tell if you've done it enough years. You can kind of tell just by how thick the honey is. But I would never say to use that as your sole method of knowing a moisture level.
yeah, and sometimes it can be lower than your capped honey because the bees
Oh,
can
sure, it
make it
is.
that
It is.
way.
I have some light capped honey that's as runny as all get out. And it's taken forever because it's all capped to get moisture down on it. So,
Great,
but once
thank
you
you.
extract it, then you don't have, if you're storing it in a bucket, you don't have enough surface area to evaporate that out. It's better to leave it on the frame.
It's better to dry the supers out while they're
Right.
still in the comb.
Right.
Yeah.
You said it better.
Let's see, CB is asking, hi everyone, I have a couple of questions. If I freeze frames of honey, do I have to wrap them in plastic wrap? I've heard condensation can be a problem when thawing. I don't typically freeze frames, so Marty, do you freeze?
Yes, I do. And I have not run into any problems too much with condensation unless what you have to do is when you take it out of what I always do is when I take it out of the freezer, I will set it in the house somewhere, air conditioned area, and what little bit of moisture, on the frost and stuff on there will evaporate off pretty quick. So I really haven't any problem with it that way. And usually when I'm freezing frames, I'm freezing them for use for the next year or something like that, where I'll put them into, starter hives or something like that to, so I thaw them out and then we'll put them into nukes or something like that to give them some.
Thank you. That leads into our second question. Can one freeze frames that have bee or bread or pollen in them bee bread for the bees to use later. And I think you just answered that. So,
Yeah, I usually always have probably, especially in the deeps. If I have a hive that dies out or something like that, then I always will put them in the freezer right away, or something
Mhm.
like that. That way I'll have extra deeps for starters and stuff. So,
great. I think that answers her question. So thank you. Greg Johnson says, I have one medium hive and I have 2 full boxes with 8 frames each full of honey. How much should I harvest and how much should I leave for the hive? Greg, if you're here, are you saying your colonies are 8 frames? And by medium, does that mean you're using medium hive bodies? If you're able to answer, you may not be able to verbally reply, but if it's a medium hive, I presume that means, I don't know what that means. It means they're medium strength or 2 full frames of boxes. So you want to leave, if they're brood boxes, you want to leave at least 2 brood boxes for the winter, so that you wouldn't touch. But if you've got a super on it, that would be extra, and you could harvest that super.
Does he have medium brood boxes, Robert? He'd have to leave 3 if he has
Yeah.
medium brood boxes.
Yeah, I think that's what he means. Got one hive, and it's probably made of medium brood boxes. But if you've got 3 of those and you've added supers, queen excluder and supers to the top, you should be able to take those supers. Generally, there's not going to be a whole lot more nectar coming in. Everything they're doing is they're going to be at least sustaining. They may make, some extra, but we only have another month, and then, everything that the bees make, you want to leave that for them for sure. Then Dr. Joe Brickner, and this he's directing to you, Cheryl. He says, for Cheryl, do you have your Freeman beetle trap bottom boards on, or did you pull them off during the summer? When should they be reinserted if you start seeing small hive beetles?
I
And
leave mine
can't-
on. I leave mine on year round.
Mhm.
You could, I suppose he's saying that pull the tray during the summer months and just use a screen bottom board. I've never done that.
Mhm.
I had swarming in that yard pretty bad the first part of the season. And even though swarming is a healthy thing that a colony does, it can cause a disproportionate bee to comb ratio. And so even though the healthy act of swarming, because only healthy colonies swarm, right? Typically, except we're not going to get into this time of year when they abscond or because of mite loads and all that stuff. But normally in the spring, healthy colonies swarm. So you can have a disproportionate ratio of bees to comb. And I have even been known to pull a box off of a colony in the spring if they swarmed and they can't protect that. But that's not the typical. But in an area where you have a lot of small hive beetle infestations, you better keep those traps in, and you better keep them with soapy water or whatever you're using in the bottom of the trap, because that's the time that the small hive beetle can get in there and get a foothold in that colony after they swarm, because there's just not enough bees that were left after over 50% fly away. So I made sure I kept mine on and made sure I kept replenishing. And I use just a soapy water solution in my trays. I've tried diatomaceous earth. I've tried the lime. I've tried all that. It gets hard and gets crust on it, and it becomes ineffective. And I don't like using the oils. So I just have used just soapy water in the traps. And so I made sure I replenished those once a week. And I haven't lost any of those colonies. They've all successfully got themselves requeened. And, I'll make a little bit of a honey crop because I've got drawn supers. And so if they swarmed, especially if they swarmed early enough in the season, they'll still bring me a little bit of a honey crop, a super or two, depending on, it's all variable on weather and stuff, and where we are in our forage,
Mhm.
time of year. But yeah, I run them year round. Hives are really get heavy towards the fall. And so maybe, the small hive beetle will, my cat is trying to climb up my, I'm trying to put laundry away and he's hadn't quite made it up into the drawer. Small hive beetle will winter over with the colony, but they'll have to cluster with the colony to stay alive once we start getting colder temperatures. So I guess for a lot of beekeepers, they thought, well, I don't need the Freeman traps through the winter, but I don't want to lift those off because they're putting on weight for winter. And I don't want to lift those things off. So I just leave the Freeman trap on year round. Now, the tray I leave in place, but I won't put water in it, obviously, especially when we get to the point where we have freezing temperatures. But I won't put, I won't have anything in to trap beetles in that tray during the winter months, but I will leave the Freeman trap in place. It's like my bottom board year round.
He had a follow-up question. It says, can these bottom boards cause the hives to get too hot? And I think Joe's just joined in. So go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, Cheryl, I was using these early, and when it started really getting warm, I started pulling the tray out a little bit, and I'd go back and check, and I'd find that there were just a bunch of bees that were in that tray dead.
Yeah, because they're a death trap if you
Yeah.
open that up.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
I
you
was
can't
really
open your tray up.
Yeah, I was concerned about that, so I eventually just took the tray off.
Yeah, well, yeah, you have to have them in place and you have to have them tight,
Okay.
or else bees can get in there. Just like the rude awakening I had with a Sundance pollen trap when the tray accidentally got blown slightly open by the wind, which you shouldn't have a problem with that on Freeman traps. But when you have a bunch of bees in your pollen tray, in your Sundance pollen tray, and you don't realize they're there, and you pull the tray open and you get a really wicked wicked surprise. But that isn't lethal to the bees. It's just lethal to the beekeeper. But anyway, yeah, you want to make sure you got those trays snugly shut
Okay.
and not allow bees to get in there.
It doesn't cause the hive to get too hot.
No. And you could even put a slatted rack on top of that Freeman trap, and that would give them even more ventilation. And I run some slatted racks on my solid bottom boards all the time. I don't run screen bottom boards.
Okay.
It wouldn't be any worse than just using a solid bottom board, in my opinion.
Okay.
The Freeman trap versus a solid.
Okay.
And that's with the tray in.
Yeah,
Whether it's in the summer and you have a bait or a way to catch them in it, or whether it's winter and you're running it with nothing, just empty. It's just like closing off. It served the same purpose as how we close off a screened bottom for those people that close off their screened bottoms, and it's mostly because of I think our wind and stuff around here. You can have a hive with a screen bottom and not close it off in the winter, but I never have done that.
well, the nuke that I bought from you really did well.
Good. Good.
I wanted to also ask you if it's okay. I have 2 deeps, and then I put a super on top of it, and then I put the queen excluder, and then I put 2 more supers on top of that. The first super that was above the queen excluder was basically full of honey yesterday when I went out and checked it. The top super had a tiny bit in it, but not much. The first super that was below the queen excluder didn't have very much honey in it at all. And so getting prepared for the winter, since it's such a strong colony right now, or at least it appears that, should I go in then and take out all the supers and just leave the 2 deeps? Is that
I would. Did she not ever lay in that medium that you had under the queen excluder? Did she not ever come up there and lay in that?
No, which was really surprising. All that was up there was honey. There was
Strange.
nothing else.
So basically they'd already put honey above that, and it kind of act as a natural cap for the queen. So she really didn't get up in those supers. I mean, they'll be fine in a 2 deep configuration. You could even extract the one that's under the queen excluder if it's all capped honey. Sure. Or even if it's open, as long as there's no brood in it.
Okay. And would it hurt if I left that super on there on top of those 2 deeps for the winter?
You can, if you're going to run a medium, what's going to happen if you keep the medium under, you don't want to have a queen excluder on in the winter at all, because the colony can leave the queen and the queen can't get up through the queen excluder and then she'll freeze to death. Okay. So you can't be running a queen excluder come winter time. If you leave that medium on there, then you're going to be running a 2 deep in a medium configuration. And as the colony eats it through its resources, it'll all be up in your medium in the spring. And so when you get ready to reverse brood boxes, that medium's probably going to go down as your bottom box on the bottom board.
Okay, so they'd be okay if I had the super on top of the 2 deeps for the winter.
If you're gonna run but then you probably should just make that super not a super anymore and become a medium brood box.
Okay.
A lot of people don't like to have brood laid in their honey supers. I mean, it puts a cocoon in there, and you get protein up in there, and then it's more susceptible to small hive beetle when you do pull it as a honey super later on.
And wax moth.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're going to make it a brood box as a medium, that's fine. It's going to be a brood box. If you're going to extract it as a honey super, then leave it as a honey super.
Yeah, I think
From a colony standpoint, would they prefer having 2 deeps in a super or just 2 deeps?
I would say 2 deeps. Anytime you've got to cross over another set of frames in the winter, and we have a really, really harsh cold spell like we had in February, I don't like when they have to cross over multiple frames as they go from box to box to box.
Yeah.
So I
Okay.
would be inclined to pull all your supers, and then if you need to feed 2 to 1, you've got plenty of time to do that in like October, November.
Okay.
To get them the right food stores. Hopefully we get some rain and cooler weather, and we got sunflowers and we got asters. Some of them were working a little soybean. My scholarship student, his farmer next door just now put his soybeans in. That's really late, but I would imagine that the bees would opt to work sunflower and aster over soybeans, even if they're planted this late, but we'll see.
Yeah, that is late.
It's very late. I'm not sure if it's not almost too late. Maybe he's going to use it for, I don't know, cut it or something. I don't know. It seems like
Gotta grow
a lot of work.
fast.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of work, but what do I know? So, yeah.
Well,
So yeah,
thank you.
have fun extracting and bring open as well as capped to be tested. Find somebody close by that can test it for you.
Yeah, actually, I can test it myself, which is amazing. I got all the equipment. I'm just not good at using it.
Well, if you have any questions, you can always give us a shout.
I know. Thank you. You guys have been great.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate that. Melanie Bailey, talking about small hive beetles. Can you salvage any comb if you've had any beetles, or just throw it away? And in my experience, just a little anecdote, a couple years ago, we caught a huge swarm and we put it in a colony that we had actually had a big beetle infestation, and we took the time and effort to wash it actually and dry it, and thought we had the combs in good shape, but caught the biggest swarm of the season that year, gave them 2 deeps, and within 2 weeks they absconded. So I think the lesson learned is not to wash and use combs that have been infected with the beetles. If it's a bad infestation and it's been slimed, especially, my opinion is no, I wouldn't. I'd throw them away and start over again. That's what I'm not going to waste that, but it was interesting, finding that out at the time. Anybody else have any experience that could answer that question? Cheryl, I don't think you've had a bad infestation of beetles yet. I'm not
No,
wishing it on you.
my only beetle problems was when I had the colony loss in the backyard, and everybody, the beetles knew about it right off, because I think the stress pheromone from the colonies as they were crashing from that pesticide exposure, however many years ago that was. So no.
Mhm. And still related to beetles, CB's asking, do you have to worry about hive beetles laying eggs in the honey supers and those eggs hatching out after one has extracted the honey? I would say no, those are empty. What the beetles are really looking for and what triggers them to lay eggs is the protein. The protein is the pollen. If you don't use a queen excluder, you're more likely to have pollen stored in honey supers. Sometimes they bring it up anyway, but it's not as much as it would be if you didn't use a queen excluder. But the bees feed them nectar and feed them honey, and that doesn't trigger them to typically want to lay eggs. It's when they have free roam and they get into the pollen, and that will trigger them to lay eggs and create the mess that they do with the larvae.
Okay, thank you.
And Karen Prescott is asking, what's the best month to begin beekeeping? I have a hive, but no bees yet. Should I wait until next year to start? Marty, what do you say?
I'd wait until spring to start. It's awful late to get them. You'd be feeding a lot to get them going right now.
Yeah, and they don't typically build very much wax at all this
Nope.
time of year. April or May or March, February, what month do you think is the best?
Depends on the weather. April probably, March or
Yeah.
April.
They need about 8 weeks to build, 2 deep brood boxes. So the sooner you can get them in April, generally, before they reach the end of May, or when we're in prime time nectar flow. So I prefer to get them in second or first week of April, but
I think springtime is much, much better than trying to get something in the fall and overwinter it. You're taking 100% of the risk.
oh yeah, it's like buying livestock, cattle or horses. The grass is done, you have to buy hay, that kind of thing. So,
Oh, thanks. That's very helpful.
okay, good luck.
Thanks.
Thanks for the question too. Mike Catsby, he posted a link. And if you want to see what hive beetles look like on a mostly empty comb, you can use that link in your browser. Anything you want to add to that, Mike? If you're able to, you can chime in. If not, I don't know if those were city bees or country bees on that frame, but it could be bad in either place. But I have more problems with the bees out in my farm bees out in the country than I do with problems with beetles in the city. So I'm trying to move everything to the sun, but I haven't quite got it all done yet. Next is from Wayne Berry. How do you tell if nectar has been washed out by rain? Anybody like to take that question? How do you tell if nectar's been washed out by rain? Well, it's kind of hard when we haven't had that much rain lately. These things are dry in the summer. Go ahead. Yeah. Generally, that's probably a problem. You might be thinking about in April or May.
Well, anytime we have a heavy shower, Robert, I mean, if it's
Uh-huh.
if it's a deep throated plant, but it's still big enough that the bee can access it, then it probably
Ah,
doesn't get nectar washed out like
so
other
like when clover's blooming and we have rains.
or even heavy dew, probably to some
Mhm.
extent. I mean, the bees know when different flowers have different peak nectaring times. So just because you don't see bees on, say, clover at 10 o'clock in the morning, they probably don't nectar the best that early in the morning. It's later in the day. And with heat, lots of times. So a lot of them pollen forage in the mornings. But anytime after we have a rain, sometimes it'll take as many as several days before that flower gets its full nectar back up and running if we've had lots and lots of rain. That's why some of those flowers, even the lindens, they're so protected by their leaf canopy, and their flowers kind of point downwards that I don't think they get as washed out as some.
Mhm.
Penstemon comes to mind right off the top of my head. Bees visit it, but there's usually more bumblebees that visit penstemon, but a bee can fit in a penstemon flower very easily. But you could see just by the shape of the flower that the rain really doesn't get into inside the bloom.
Mhm.
Cheryl, can I ask a question about what you're
Sure.
talking about? This is Barbie.
I know.
This is it.
I recognize your voice.
Yeah, I knew you'd know my
You would
voice.
be able to tell me which flowers would be more protected than others from rains.
But the thing was that I was interesting when you said that the nectar is usually later in the day. And I didn't know that. What causes that?
Well, not on all plants, but there's different times that plants nectar better than others. And I by no means know the time of day. We know that a certain amount of drought stress is beneficial for nectar production. Just like we don't have in the spring when it's cold, in the spring when it's wet, we don't have nectar production on black locust like we do when we introduce a little drought or a little heat stress and water stress. So, you know,
That's
drier
interesting.
drier conditions, hotter conditions.
I'm really one of the on out here that we have is a whole lot of that chicory, those little purple flowers that open just in the morning.
Uh-huh.
And
Mhm.
and they love that. And all I ever see is them collecting pollen, but they have to do it
Pollen.
really early because
Yeah.
the flowers close. And I just wondered if they get nectar from those, if they're even able to. The nice thing is they don't get rained out because they open new ones every day.
Yeah. And I mean, it's been my experience that I see a lot of pollen foraging in the mornings when it's still somewhat cool or after rain. I see more pollen foraging. Not that you can't have pollen foraging in the middle of a hot day. I mean, bringing in pollen now in 100-degree temperatures. They're bringing in white pollen. I had one of our club members send me some stuff for what's blooming in your backyard. I'm not going to give it away, but you'll figure it out when you get this next month's issue. But I mean, thistle is one. I haven't seen much thistle blooming yet, but thistle is one that puts out a white pollen. But there's some other what we call weeds that are invasive that they've been bringing in some white pollen on their feet from, in their pollen sacs. Yeah.
But it's probably just not much nectar from the chicory, I'm
I
guessing.
No, I don't know. You'd have to just watch a bee on the flower and see if she's using her proboscis and trying to put it into a little nectary on a chicory, or if
Well,
she's
I
basically.
have been, and and I wish I knew more about that. Do they collect nectar at the same time they collect pollen ever?
I have seen them do both.
Okay, because I see them all on the chicory in the morning, they all have
I mean, if
pollen.
they're out checking pollen, they're doing pollen. If they're out doing nectar, they're doing nectar. But I've seen sometimes they do both.
Okay, okay,
But yeah, the chicory, they're getting a lot of pollen from. You know, just
Okay.
like my St. John's wort, you know, they just go dance across they're not stopping for any nectar. You can just see them dancing and collecting it on their pollen in
okay.
their pollen sacs. So yeah, you'll have to watch.
Well, I think they look like they're collecting pollen too, but they just had, nectar, but they just had
Nectar.
pollen on them too. So that's why I wondered. I always wanted to ask that question, so now I got to ask it.
Oh
Thank
no,
you
to
both.
watch them and take a video.
Okay.
Yeah, there, I'll have to find the book. But some plants put out more nectar than pollen,
Is it
and others,
Peter Linder's you're talking about?
yes.
I
um,
haven't.
Yeah.
But
um,
you know, as far as the time of day would be the question, and I don't know. I mean, I should read up. I have the book here.
That too.
It-
I've got the book right above me.
And it's called what? Peter what?
It is Garden Plants for Honeybees. Peter Lintner, Lindtner.
Okay,
Oh, that looks backwards. I don't know if chicory's in there, but I'm sure it is. He's got so much.
Yeah, Garden Plants for Honeybees. Peter Lintner, Lindtner.
okay.
Passed away a few years ago.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
nice reference book, and it goes by month. But you know, he's kind of, I mean, it's not going to be just localized to Northeast Kansas, so you kind of have to take that into account too. Joe's not on today, is she?
No. I think the heat kept a few people away. Besides Jolie and Cecil have a good excuse, but I'm not sure where Becky
Well,
and Steve
yeah,
are.
I don't know where they are at the fair. Jolie and Cecil are doing the fair. They're probably pulling supers, Robert, maybe. I don't know.
And then Buck Bradley had a comment. He says you can also use honey above 18.6% to make mead. Yes. There was a very interesting article a couple months ago, I believe, in Bee Culture, and this is why people should take to the magazines. And maybe it was an American Bee Journal. I can't remember which, and I should have marked it, but they were talking about spores in the atmosphere, and you can have a high moisture honey, maybe 19.5%. But if you have a very low spore count, it would not ferment.
Stuart had
And it-
posted that,
Yeah.
too, on one of the Facebook pages.
And if you had even a lower moisture content, but you had a very high count, it could ferment. So it all depends.
Yeah, even
Location
as
is
low
important.
as 18, I think.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. When you're dealing with mead, okay? This happened last year before, whatever. I was talking to a lady over at Midwestern. She had several 5-gallon buckets of honey that fermented, right? And basically they said just throw it out. Okay. Would you be able to make mead out of something like that that's already starting fermenting, or?
No, I don't think so. No.
No, it's not the right kind of yeast.
Okay, I just wondered. I just kind of curious.
I wouldn't.
I've never tried making mead or anything like that. I just don't know much about it. I don't drink anyway, so I mean, it wouldn't make much difference to me. But I just wondered.
It'd be a waste of time, I think.
Okay.
Robert, if you extracted something though, if you were a small beekeeper and you extracted something on accident, then you get the reading and it's like 19 or 20 and you're like, oh my gosh, and it's not going to be anything that you can eat up right away.
Mhm.
Could you freeze that?
Yes. Yeah, freezing would help.
And then you can decide what you're going to do with it.
That'll give you time.
Yeah,
Ultimately, it
Yeah.
may ferment while it's in the freezer too over time.
but it would
you
help
know,
slow things down.
it would slow things down a lot.
Yeah.
That would help.
And there is a way you can bring the moisture down, but it's very painstaking, and we don't want to discuss that at this, at this meeting, but there is methods to bring it down in small batches.
So you're saying don't go there right now.
Don't go there. You have to leave it in something other than a bucket, and probably your uncapping tank or something with a big surface area, and maybe a warming light and a fan, because maybe someone has done this in her youth. So yes, it can be done, but it's very laborious. Not something I'd want to do again,
Mhm.
but it can
Well,
be done.
those were all the comments and questions in the chat. Does anybody have anything off the top of your head that you would like to ask verbally? Feel free to jump in. This is Zoom. We're social. Doesn't sound like it. Good discussion on honey harvesting and beetles. Cheryl, how's your harvesting going? Did you do any today? In this heat?
No, I didn't do any. I'm getting ready for tomorrow. I checked moistures on some supers, and going to have a helper tomorrow. So let's see,
Extracting?
I pulled some more 2 days ago, and we extracted a little bit on Saturday, and then I'll extract. It's just kind of a process over here. It's not, I don't have the big fancy uncapper and motorized everything. So we do a little bit, and then we rest, and we do a little bit, and we rest. It's a process.
The old-fashioned way on a massive scale.
Yeah, I mean, you can get a bigger extractor, but then you're just going to bog down on the front end, which is the uncapping portion. And until I get one of those automated ones like Robert does, fancy things, which would require me to keep machines up and running, that's probably not going to happen. So we have 2 uncapping tanks, and the spouse helps when he can. And my 89-year-old father likes to come over in a climate controlled honey house and help me. So he's coming tomorrow, and I feed him lunch. So it's a
Yay.
win-win. It's a win-win. So we work a little bit.
Does your mom not like to?
Mom's bad. Her back is a mess, so she doesn't hardly come along anymore. But he's come a couple times on Tuesdays and helped. So, and we have a good time. So yeah, I mean, about two supers make a bucket, give or take.
Yep.
So
Fantastic.
yep.
Yeah.
So it's fun.
Yeah, like we mentioned earlier, it hasn't been that great of a honey season. Hopefully you'll get at least a bucket out of 2 supers. Some of them aren't quite that full.
I've been doing two. I mean, they're not, some of them have built the comb out pretty wide, because once you get your comb drawn, most of us run nine frames in our honey supers once that they've completely drawn them out. And you have some that, I mean, I'm not picking everything by any means, to get the cappings off, but they're not drawn out beyond the frame as much as they have been in years past in a lot of them. I mean, that first box, if they were on black locust, yes, and if they didn't eat some of it back. So
Hey, well, this would be a good year to keep track of your best producers for queen rearing next year.
Yep. If that same queen's still there. So anyway.
Okay. Well,
just make sure if you're out working in your apiary that you have your phone, and I wear a headband and drink plenty of water or fluids and listen to your body and don't overheat yourself. So take breaks, get in the shade, get in an air conditioned room, work with somebody, it's safer. Okay.
Good advice. Excellent.
Robert, I do have one last question.
Yeah.
Again, I got a nuke from Cheryl in the spring. When do I need to replace that queen?
That, you know, for me, second year queens peak in their second year, or 2-year queens do. So certainly not this year, if she's a this year queen, which I'm sure she probably is. But Cheryl, what would you do?
Yeah, she should be really good this next year. She's also going to have the propensity to swarm because she's a second year queen. You know,
And that's one of the benefits of swarming. You get a new
Yeah.
queen.
yeah, I mean, ideally, if she swarms and you can catch her and put her in a box, then it's a win-win all the way around because you've let her do what she wanted to do and then you've still got her. And they're great wax producers, but that usually doesn't happen for most of us. They'll go to the highest tree like they do at Robert's house. Mine, I train to stay, no higher than about 5 or 6 feet. So it works really well. So
Good luck
When you
with
have
that.
small trees, sure.
you could,
Good luck with that.
yeah, I mean, you could make a split for if the colony does well next spring, you could make a split with that queen. And, some people think making a split with the old queen, like makes them think they've swarmed, especially if you're going to put her in a different apiary with, just a small amount. I mean, you'd want to break her down to about just 3 frames of brood early in April. And the later you make the split, then the more frames of brood she gets. But you can cut her down significantly in the spring and she'll still make honey for you. They'll grow and do well. So that's how we all end up with as many hives as we do. So I suppose you could remarry those back together with the new queen and save the old queen on the side. But like Robert said, it's such a waste of a second year queen to do that. So if you can try to get her to grow as well, then you end up with 2 different colonies, but you've got that new queen that you've made a split with. So
Okay, I'll probably call you in the spring.
yeah, don't you need to talk to Robert about swarm management, not me.
Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining in this evening. It's still warm outside, and enjoy the warm weather while we've got it, because in 5-6 months we're going to be complaining the other way. It's too cold.
Well, I temperatures were going to be in the mid 90s well into next week so far as
Yeah.
my winter can take me. So
Good extracting weather. The honey's warm. So thank you everybody. Appreciate it. Have a nice evening. We'll
Bye-bye.
do it again next month.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, guys.